Hi, I'm Launi with Learn Law for All, and today on our podcast, we have Daryl Weinman. Hi, Daryl.
Hi, Lenny.
Thank you for being here today. Daryl is going to talk to us about the intersection of law with different types of law with family law. So there's a lot of ways that intersects. A little bit about Daryl. She is the founder of Weinman and Associates in Austin, and she's a family law specialized certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. She handles divorce and complex facets like child custody, support issues, and asset division. And she's really known for her strong courtroom presence. I don't want to go into too much of it because you can see all of her biography down below. But something very interesting, she also does the Hague Convention stuff, which I find fascinating. So I don't know if anyone else does, but she's got some cases listed on her website. So again, as our disclaimer, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Listening to this does not create an attorney-client relationship or privilege. We are not giving specific legal advice here. Daryl is licensed you're still licensed in New York, yes?
No, I gave
Not
it up
active,
because
right? Yeah, she was in New York and then now is in Texas, but she's licensed only in Texas. I'm licensed only in Arizona. So take that for what it's worth and enjoy. So I've got some questions for you, Daryl. Thank you again for being here. And we did just do a whole CLE on this where she dives into this a lot more. But can you give me a list of types of law that intersect with family law?
So all kinds of law intersect with family law. Immigration, we need to know when two people are getting divorced, what is their immigration status? Because once they get divorced, are they both going to be allowed to stay here? And that's a big issue. So like in Austin, we do a lot of H-1B visas, which is a type of visa where somebody with specialized knowledge can be sponsored by a corporation or a university, and they're brought over here and their spouse and their dependents are on H-4 visas. Well, if they get divorced, the H-4 visa status goes away and they have to go back to their home country, and then only the H-1B visa person gets to stay. So when I hear that, one of my first reactions is, well, let's get them both on they can apply for permanent residency status. So let's get that in place so that at least both parents can stay here and they can co-parent. So really important to know what is their immigration status, what kind of visa, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I did mention this in the class. There's a lot of different statuses, right? You gave, I can't even, it was like 3-page list of different, maybe 5, of different types of statuses and the impact that it has. So keep that in mind, and you know that it's so important. What was it? There was also, what about the spousal maintenance part on that? We talked about
there's a fiance visa, and of course lots of people know, oh, if you marry an American, then you can come to this country. Okay, so that gets, we see that one a lot. It's a K-1 visa. So if a US citizen wants to marry someone from abroad, they can apply for a K-1 visa, and it takes a while. It takes probably about a year right now for it to get approved, and they have to go through an interview process and so on. Once they get approved, they have to come here and do their wedding within 90 days. But the person who's sponsoring the foreign national has to sign an affidavit that says they promise to support that person for up to 10 years. And it doesn't matter if they stay married. So, you bring someone over here from a foreign country and find out after a year or so, hey, we're not really compatible. I don't really want to be married to this person anymore. Well, that's fine. You can get divorced, but you are not going to get out of that affidavit. And so even if you're not married anymore, you still have to sponsor, you have to pay for this person's income for up to 10 years. And it just becomes spousal maintenance. It becomes alimony. Whether or not you're in a state that has alimony, whether or not they would qualify otherwise, you signed that affidavit and it survives divorce. So something to consider.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I've used that in a case before, but only once. And I was thankful that we found it. We couldn't, all of the documents had mysteriously disappeared. And so once we did finally find it, then that was helpful. What other areas of law do you think are pretty important? And we did, by the way, just so that everyone knows, we did this CLE, but we're doing individual CLEs on all intersections of the law. So we'll be talking with an immigration person to be talking about that. and a criminal attorney and a bankruptcy attorney. So just keep that in mind. But we are just kind of touching the subjects and why they are so important. So what are some other areas?
Well, so criminal law, a lot of times that is the last straw when people split up. There's, an assault, a domestic violence assault. And so that leads to potentially protective order. If there's a protective order in place and the parents can't be anywhere near each other, how are they going to share the children? Who's going to live where? What is their communication going to be like? What if somebody is going to go off to jail or go off to prison for a little while? Are they going to, how are we going to handle, is there going to be any contact with the children? What kind of support is there going to be? A big thing though that I tell all of my clients who could potentially be going off to jail or to prison for a little while, if you have a child support order in place, make sure you file a motion to modify that child support order before you leave. Even if you can't get it heard and finalized before you leave, have it on file, because the courts are prohibited from retroactively going back and changing your child support. So, you went off to prison for 5 years, your child support's accruing all that time at 6% interest, and there's nothing a court can do to forgive any of it. But if you filed your motion before you left, they can retroactively modify all the way back to the date of that motion. So just get that filed, even if you handwrite it and send it to the court.
And I have a question for you on that. In Arizona, and maybe it's not like if it's a big prison, but I think, don't they provide you the documents to file that while you're in jail or prison?
I think you can get a hold of all kinds of documents in prison, but you have to know to do it. And most people think, well, I don't know the child support anymore because I'm in prison, I don't have any income. Yeah, well, your child support's still accruing, and it's accruing at 6% interest, at least in Texas. So
yeah, in Arizona it's 10%.
Oh,
Arizona's
wow.
10% interest. So yeah, you get good interest rates on child support.
But, so yeah, we have criminal law, then there's bankruptcy, people who are getting divorced are definitely struggling financially. Is it worth going through bankruptcy, not going through bankruptcy? Chapter 7 or chapter 13, and do they do it jointly? And there's a lot to consider with that, because a lot of times as the marriage is sinking, the debt is going up. So what are they going to do about that? What assets are exempt, non-exempt, meaning if you're going to file for bankruptcy, the trustee is going to come in and take all your stuff and sell it to pay your debts. But there are assets that are exempt, like your first house, your first car, and your retirement. Other than that, everything else is fair game. They can come in, sell it, pay off your debts, and your credit's ruined.
Yeah, that it's really interesting. And I know this is probably more a question for a bankruptcy attorney, but if you have two homes and you do get divorced, maybe it's better to file after the court has divided those two homes so that each person has their one home and their one car and their property that's exempt. Because I guess as being divorced, you'll have actually the right to have more property between you as opposed to if you're together, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So again, because it intersects with family law, you need to plan it out. Like, when is the ideal time to do it? There are people who don't want to be divorced and will do what they can to mess with the other. And when you file for bankruptcy, the bankruptcy court's going to put an immediate stay on the divorce proceeding, so you can't finalize it. Now, it's not hard to get that stay lifted, but it generally will take at least a few weeks. And then the trustee at least is, watching over the divorce to make sure you're not doing anything to prejudice the creditors that are part of the bankruptcy case. So yeah, they can play games and stall it out. Even if they don't qualify for bankruptcy, just by filing it, they put a stay in place to prevent the divorce from being final.
Yeah, there are some nasty tricks out there that people do all the time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about estate planning, because that was something that we talked about briefly, and you and I talked about how important that was in the CLE and why that's so important. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so particularly if you're about to be a single parent, you need to remember that if you don't have a spouse, who's going to be your next of kin to be making decisions for you? And the example that I use is my good friend she was a great planner, except somehow she didn't do her own final documents. And when she, at 49 years old, had a brain aneurysm, her children, who were 19, 18, and 13, were the ones standing by her bedside. And it was put on them to decide, do you pull the plug? Do you organ donor? It was horrible. And luckily they did have aunts, uncles, grandparents who could help them, but they were the ones who actually had to sign the paperwork. And do you really want to do that to your kid? Like, if you have your paperwork in order and your DNR signed and your medical power of attorney to, your brother or parent, at least it's not your kid that's making the decision. So getting those documents signed is super important. The other piece of estate planning that we talked about was if you forget to change your beneficiaries, because you have beneficiaries for your retirement accounts, your bank accounts, your life insurance, and if you forget to change them after date of divorce, don't worry. They will, if you still have your ex-spouse listed when you die, the money does not go to the ex-spouse. It's presumed that you forgot to change it, and it would go to your heirs. Now, if you want to give it to your ex-spouse, if you do intend for them to have it, some people stay very friendly after divorce, you can do that. You just have to reaffirm it in writing after date of divorce to say, no, I really meant to leave my ex-spouse as the beneficiary, and you can do that.
That's really important too, because oftentimes in mediations, like in Arizona, a court can't assign the ex-spouse as a beneficiary, but they can agree to it in a mediation. And so, it's really important for attorneys to say, listen, I understand that you guys are making this agreement, but this is an action that needs to be taken to, ensure that your spouse stays on it, because even if you just don't remove your spouse, it's important that you reaffirm it to make sure that they get that money.
We talk about too in military, when we do military divorces, the SBP, the survivor benefit plan. So that is something that the military member has to elect at some point, who is going to be their survivor, who's going to get the SBP. Now, once they've changed it, they can never, ever change it again. Military does not allow you to amend it or change it. So if you elected your spouse and then you're going to divorce your spouse, then your spouse is still going to get it. And the military member has to pay for it. There's a cost that goes along with it. It's like $300, $350 a month to have the survivor benefit plan, because you can decline it. You don't have to have it. But if you choose it and you choose your survivor, you can never, ever change it. So just to be aware that that might be out there, because usually if I've got the military member, I'll say, look, she's going to continue to get this benefit. She should be paying for it. So she should pay the $350 a month, not him. He's not getting any benefit from it. So, that's just something else to think about, to talk about.
Interesting. What happens if they don't pay it? I guess if they're in the military, they're going to get in trouble. It's going to come out automatically.
It comes out of their check anyway. It's not optional. The military holds it.
That's incredible. I did not know that one. That's an interesting one, and kind of a scary one, I'm sure, for a lot of military people, because I've done military divorces, but they were short. They weren't, long.
We have a military base not too far from here, so we do a bunch of military divorces, and it's after you've been married more than 10 years where a lot of things really kick in. Less than 10 years, the military won't divide retirement, so you just have to rely on the fact that the person who's keeping it all will buy out the other spouse, but you can't get DFAS to actually write 2 checks like you can with other types of retirement.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, maybe you can do one on military divorces. I think those are so important on so many levels, because there's so many federal laws that come into play with military that, our state laws are we're at their mercy, right?
Yes. Yeah. The state court can order anything they want, but the federal law overrides it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, deployments and things like that are so important. So yeah, that would be another great one to do.
Yeah. And we definitely deployments, and we have that in the family code on what happens if a parent is deployed and how does custody work for that. And all kinds of stuff.
And so we did talk about a couple of other ones. I just want to kind of go through them real quick. I know we're running a little short on time, but we talked about immigration law, which you talked about, criminal law, which you talked about a little bit, bankruptcy, which you talked about a little bit. We just talked about estate planning. There's civil law, which we have a whole other podcast on, and a course specifically on that one. And we'll have courses on all of these individually where we go more in depth. But tax law is a big one too. And you talked a little bit about the innocent spouse claim.
Yeah. So the IRS looks at 2 people who are married as they owe the debt equally. And of course, maybe they didn't incur the debt equally. So like if one spouse is self-employed and for years didn't properly report income, maybe didn't file tax returns, didn't pay the taxes, whatever it is. And the others, and then, you get divorced, and all of a sudden the IRS is trying to take from the other spouse, and they say, I had no idea what they were doing with their money, whether they were paying taxes. I didn't handle it. I have nothing to do with that. I didn't get any of the benefit of it either, because we were separated for years, and they kept all that income. So the IRS can say, okay, you're an innocent spouse, I'm not going to put this on you, because the IRS just wants its money. They don't really care who incurred it or what. They see you've got money in a bank account, they're going to lien it and take it. And then you can say, wait, it's not my debt, it's his debt. So, but you have to prove that. And in a lot of families, one person's running the business, the other is managing the financial accounts. Well, you might not have been running the business, but you still knew what was going on. And, so you're going to have to go through a lot with the IRS. But if you really didn't know and didn't get the benefit of it, then you can get the innocent spouse exemption. Well,
Yeah, I don't think they like to give that away very often.
Yeah, no.
But again, also if you signed it, right? They're like, oh, he put it in front of me and I signed it. I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But again, you signed it. So, I think the presumption is.
The presumption is that you knew, but if you can prove that you didn't, then maybe they'll let you off the hook. The other stuff we talked about in tax law, though, is alimony used to be deductible to the payor and taxable income to the receiver, and it's not anymore. It's non-taxable event. So whoever's paying it can't deduct it. Whoever receives it doesn't pay income tax on it, and you can't use it as a bargaining chip in mediation anymore.
No, it used to be, or you remember, you probably did this too, where you would you'd put a little more in child support, because child support wasn't tax deductible for the receiver either. So you'd maybe put a little more there and a little off here, and you could sort of balance it to get like the benefit that somebody needed with the least tax burden.
Right.
In
But
some
we used
cases.
to do it as like, if you're going to buy somebody out of the equity in the house that you're keeping or out of the business that you're keeping, I owe the other person, $200,000. Well, instead of transferring 200,000, I'll pay, 220,000, but I get the taxable, as alimony. I get the tax deduction. She has to pay the income tax on it, but her tax bracket's lower. Let's just do it that way. Yeah, that went away. It's gone.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. I guess I think it did end up creating more money, right? I mean, I think it did end up creating a bigger increase in taxes received, because the income splitting that it was achieving before wasn't working when you started making the high earner pay the taxes on it with the higher rate.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the exemptions went away too. The per child exemptions went away. And now we just have head of household, which is great when you've got 2 kids, because they can each claim 1 kid and they can each get the head of household exemption. But when there's only 1 kid, we can, by agreement, of course, state court can't override federal law, but by agreement, they can take turns claiming head of household each, every other year, and share the benefit, which we do that.
This is so interesting, and because in Arizona, they do make orders that say, even if one parent, say parent A has the kids 80% of the time and parent B has them 20% of the time, but they're paying child support, they get the child in the percentage. They get to claim the child in the percentage, or at least they did, in the percentage that they were earning.
Huh.
So that's and again, contrary to
to the
law.
IRS code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I don't know
interesting.
how they get away with that.
I think people just do it. That's just, they get to claim, this year and this year and this year. Now, again, I haven't had a family law case now since 2018. So I don't know what they're doing now with that law change. But
that had to, because we used to be able to trade off the exemptions every other year, things like that. But now it's not a per child exemption. It's if you have 1, if you have 10, doesn't matter, same deduction.
Yeah, that's interesting. Ugh. So another tax issue, that's difficult. And then you talked a little bit about real estate and juvenile, which was very different between the states. And so that's something that she talked a little bit more in the CLE, but something that we'll have separate classes on also. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I think these are really, really interesting subjects where you have to know the other areas of law, or you can really get in trouble and you can pass them off. Look, I've had clients where I would say, yeah, you need to talk to a criminal attorney. You know,
Yeah.
you
I
need
can
to
tell
know
you though,
when to shut up.
having a really good network of other professionals so that when someone comes in, they say, am I going to qualify to refinance this note? I can pick up the phone and call my friend who's a mortgage lender. You know, where should I invest this money that I'm going to get from the house? Let me call my financial, you know, I have all these people in my world, in my network, and because you have to admit, you can't know it all. And there's, you know,
No.
in family law, there's so many areas that it touches on. You know, I learned all this stuff because I've been doing it so long and I've dealt with all these other professionals. But if I have an immigration question, I pick up the phone and call an expert because I'm not an expert.
No, but you sure know a lot, which we found out in the CLE. That was a lot of information that I honestly had no idea about. So it's very interesting. I definitely think we need to come up with like a cheat sheet for family law attorneys, things that they need to understand, especially if the people getting divorced are in a tech city like you are. You're in Austin,
Yeah.
right? And or San Francisco or Seattle or New York, wherever the techie people are. I mean, I think we have some techie people in Arizona, but I have to say, I came across the immigration stuff on a whole different level because, you know, we are in Arizona and we have a lot of people come in that are undocumented. That can be, you know, that's a whole separate problem.
That's another issue.
And so, yeah, so that's a lot of moving pieces in immigration law. So we definitely have to do a course on that. And I know we're planning on it. So thank you so much for being here. And I'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.